Hello everyone, this is part 23 of What If Naruto Was a Prodigy and in the Anbu, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to see more comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
The small fishing village was completely deserted as Naruto led his team towards it. They arrived on the outskirts just as the sun was beginning to rise, and carefully made their way inside. The silence was deafening, broken only by the crash of the waves coming to shore and the gentle wind that brushed by their heads. It was a tense atmosphere, and Naruto kept his guard up and a steady grip on a kunai, surveying the pillaged town carefully. Whatever had happened had occurred months ago. Most of the buildings had been razed, and only the blackened wooden remnants of frames continued to stand. A large wooden pier had once extended out towards the ocean, but it was shattered and in pieces. Several boats were overturned and in pieces on the beach, and hundreds of pieces of smaller debris had washed up onshore. The worst part was the smell. Bodies had been left out to rot, and over 24 heads had been severed and placed on spikes at the center of the village. While time and nature had done much to decompose the corpses, an acrid and rotten smell still hung over the ruins, making Naruto wrinkle his nose behind his mask. Yet, it wasn't as bad as he remembered, and he absently wondered if he was getting used to it. Daichi, Sasuke, Yuka formed defensive perimeter around the village. Naruto signed. The three Anbu nodded, Sasuke a little slower and more hesitant than the others, and they disappeared in a flicker of movement. Naruto was glad to see the Uchiha go. The boy did not need to see more of this. One massacred clan compound was enough. He signaled to Kage, Komaki and Toa, scatter and search for priority target 1, look out for enemy traps, signal if you find anything. The team broke apart. Rat, their tracker and advisor, hung back, observing everything around him with an air of detachment and professionalism. The tall man came to stand next to Naruto, his white mask hiding anything he may have been feeling. Many of these bodies were killed in a single cut, Rat observed tonelessly. He bent down next to one of the desiccated corpses, gesturing at the rotten body. A medium-sized blade, thin and angular, the weapon of a professional. Anbu, Naruto asked quietly. Rat nodded and stood up. Most likely tied, Kirigaku's Anbu and the Mizukage's sword. It is likely that they uncovered evidence of the town's involvement in the Underground Railroad and put it to the torch. Naruto looked at the impaled heads. Any recognizable human feature had been eaten away by nature and the elements, and bleached white bone peeked out from behind blackened, decaying flesh. A warning, the blonde asked. Rat considered it. Possibly, he conceded. I will investigate the bodies and see if I can identify the target. Naruto nodded in acknowledgement and Rat bowed his head before he left, bending down over a haphazardly stacked pile of corpses and leaning forward. Naruto turned away, observing the fallen buildings around him. The wind ruffled his black cloak and brittle wood and charcoal cracked under his feet as he walked through the ruins. He wasn't quite sure what he was feeling. It was a muddled mix of different emotions, and it made his heart beat furiously. The chains rattled in his head, very softly, almost like it was whispering to him, but he ignored the manifestation of his power with practiced ease. Whatever had happened to the village, it had been quick. He spotted some signs of a resistance to the invading forces, evidence of several explosions, scattered debris, the broken hilt of a kunai, and several dozen shuriken embedded in one of the blackened poles. Somebody here had fought back, and the pattern of attack indicated a fighting retreat. Naruto considered that. Perhaps the resistance had fought against Tide in an attempt to let as many people escape as they could. Certainly, there were suitcases and bags left scattered along the main road, as if people had dropped what they had been carrying and just ran. The ground was muddy, and by now nature had most certainly removed in tracks. The blonde rubbed the back of his head thoughtfully. A burning sensation emanating from his right shoulder, his Anbu tattoo indicated that somebody had just tried to signal him. Naruto glanced around and saw Toa waving his hand on the other side of the village, and he approached him. What have you got? He asked quietly. His voice echoed in the deserted ruins, and he felt a curious sense of embarrassment, as if speaking out loud was somehow disrespectful to those who had died here. He pushed the feeling away and crouched down next to Toa. Toa gestured to the pile of rubble in front of him. It had once been a house, or so the fallen blackened wooden beams suggested. That pile there, the fabric, Toa answered softly. They resemble the traditional clothes of the Lightning Court. Naruto looked at him, brushing his fingers along the crusty, dirty fur. Underneath all of the dirt, soot and ash was the remnants of something that might have been fine furs. It was hard to tell, but it was their best lead yet. He pressed a finger on his Anbu tattoo and signaled Daichi. The Hyuga appeared a few moments later, crouched down next to him. Sir, Daichi asked crisply. Use your eyes to search the ruins of this house, Naruto ordered. Look for bodies. I want to know if anybody was in here when it burned down. Daichi nodded and made a single hand seal. A shudder ran through him as his Byakugan activated behind his mask, and he carefully looked the house up and down. No bodies, he said after a few moments. But there was a tunnel of some kind underneath it. It's a bit hard to tell, since it's been completely caved in, but I think it leads away from the town. Toa and Naruto exchanged a look. An escape tunnel, Toa suggested. Rigged to collapse once it was used so they couldn't be followed, Naruto concluded with a grim nod. It was what he would do. The problem was that if the tunnel had collapsed, it was most likely done in a way that would make it extremely difficult to find its exit. The fact that it was months later wouldn't help at all. Captain, Rat had appeared. I have found a clue. Naruto followed the stoic tracker to the other side of the village towards a forest of bamboo, Komaki and Toa following him. At the very edge of the tree line was a series of small rocks, arranged in a series of patterns. A series of geometric shapes had been scratched on the surface, a message for those who knew how to read it. What does it say? Naruto asked Rat. Rat shook his head. Unknown, he answered tonelessly. The codes have changed. This makes no sense at all, and I don't have a copy of the current cipher. Naruto exhaled noisily. Right, he said, his mind ticking away. He bit his lip. Here's what we know. Loyalist forces approached this village. There was a fight. There was at least one escape tunnel leading away. The Loyalists won and executed the village's population. He paused. What was the exact population of the village? He asked Rat. 74, Rat answered. Komaki looked up sharply. I only counted 51 bodies, she said. Naruto smiled thinly. Then it's likely that there are survivors, he surmised. And if there were survivors, they would have gone to somebody who could protect them. The resistance, Toa supplied thoughtfully. Naruto turned to Rat, who answered the unasked question. I have contacts, the man revealed. He gestured to the east. There is a larger town a few hours' travel away on the other side of the island. I have a safe house nearby. Then it's decided, Naruto said determinedly. He slapped his fist in his palm. Gather the rest of the team were leaving. In the early hour of sunrise, Team Sigma stealthily made their way from one side of the large island to the other. As it warmed, it became apparent that the weather in the land of water was far different than the weather in the land of fire. The humidity was much higher, and with the rise in temperature came a deluge of insects. Crickets chirped from within the dampness of the jungle ground, mosquitoes buzzed all around them and tall, spindly trees rose up to cover them all in a brilliant green canopy. Ferns and bushes grew wherever possible and moss and fungus crept over everything in sight, mushrooms rising up the tree trunks and moss covering entire rocks. It was almost beautiful, if not for the sticky feeling in the air. Beneath his mask, Naruto was sweating. Nonetheless, he kept his composure as the small group traveled deeper into the jungle. A large mountain rose up from the middle of the island, a volcano that apparently hadn't erupted since the time of the Sage of the Six Paths. Their destination was on the other side of that mountain. However, according to Rat, there was also a Kiri encampment somewhere up in the mountain. Naruto wasn't sure of its exact purpose. For all he knew, it could be the local garrison, but he wanted to avoid it if possible. They sped through the jungle, Daichi once again keeping watch. The poor Hyuga was stretching his bloodline to the limit, chewing through his chakra reserves quite quickly, and he had resorted to using the Byakugan in small bursts every few minutes. If the team were to come into conflict with the enemy, Daichi would not be able to do much but stay out of the way and let his teammates cover the slack. It was a necessary sacrifice. Alerting the enemy to their presence was the last thing that Naruto wanted, and Daichi's limited combat effectiveness wouldn't matter as long as they could avoid the Kiri-nin's attention. At the head of the small group, Daichi stiffened during a mid-jump, and when he landed, he held up a hand, turning his head to look behind them. Contact, he signed urgently. 3 Shinobi, bearing in from NW, ETA 35 seconds. Defensive Formation 9, Naruto commanded. He dove down to the ground, landing neatly on top of a rock. Other members of the team hid themselves in the shadows of the trees and high up in the branches, while Naruto placed a finger on his tattoo and summoned forth a shimmering blanket. He wrapped himself around it and huddled amongst the mossy rocks. Around him, the blanket seemed almost transparent, allowing Naruto to see out of it. On the outside, however, the silky blanket had leached the colors off the surroundings, camouflaging him from view. With the positioning of the team, they were well hidden from sight and ready to defend the group from any angle of attack should they be detected. Luckily, the enemy contact sped past out of Naruto's view, and after a few minutes Daichi stepped out from the shadows of a tree. Contact evaded, the Hyuga signed. Resume position. Stay alert, Naruto signed. He rose up from the rocks, resealing the blanket back into the storage partition in his Anbu tattoo. The rest of his squad fell into formation and they continued their journey, albeit at a rather slower pace than before. They were more alert now that an active enemy presence had been confirmed. They continued on for some time, stopping twice more to avoid detection from nearby Kirinin. The patrol routes were erratic, following a schedule or pathways that only they knew. At one point, the squad was forced into the depths of a swamp, hidden within the mud and scum of the stagnant water as a full squad of shinobi leisurely walked past. They were noisy, loud and brutish, swearing and spitting as they told crude jokes. Team Sigma could have put them down in an instant if so required, but a missing squad would raise more flags than they needed. Enemy activity in the region has dramatically increased, Rat signed as they continued on, possibly as a consequence of the discovery of resistance activity. Mission difficulty has increased. Despite the increased patrols, the Kirinin lacked the skill to detect the elite team of Anbu from Konoha. Mission reports had suggested that the bulk of Kiri's forces were made up from fast-streamed genin, making up for their lack of skill with brutality and fanatical loyalty to the Mizukage. It was sometime before noon when Team Sigma finally approached the destination. Taiji was a moderately sized town built across a vasti, polluted inlet. Large wooden piers crisscrossed over the water, and rows of small huts crammed up against each other. Thick hatch covered most of the buildings, and dozens of small boats bobbed further out on the inlet. The largest building rising up from the town is a warehouse built on the side of the cliff on the other side of Taiji. Made from metal and rising far beyond any other building, a lot of activity seemed to be centered on it, and many other smaller buildings had been put up around it. A large canal had been dug out of the ground on the other side of the warehouse, and a moderately sized cargo ship was slowly leaving the warehouse, carrying its goods to an unknown destination. Rat led the team closer to the city, stopping at what looked like an abandoned hut at the edge of the city. Hidden behind the foliage of some shrubs, it blended into the background was almost undetectable unless you were standing right on it. Rat stopped at the entrance of the safe house and turned to Naruto. I will need to enter the city in order to meet my contact, he told them monotonously. I suggest that you and your team take defensive positions around this location and await my return. Understood, Naruto replied after a few moments. A slight frown crossed his face behind his mask. But I'm going to come with you. Rat cocked his head. Nonetheless, he nodded his consent as Naruto turned to his team. Kage, you're in operational command until I return, Naruto ordered. Wait here. If we haven't sent word by midnight, assume the worst. Yes, sir, Kage responded. He gave a few curt commands to the rest of the team and many of them disappeared into the foliage surrounding them. Rat motioned for Naruto to follow him and they entered the dark safe house. It was more of a safe cubby than a safe house, with barely enough room for the two of them. A large wooden crate with rusty hinges lay on one side of the room, while a small hammock had been put up on the other side. Rat opened the crate and began to pull out some rags. Get changed, Rat commanded. Naruto pressed his finger on his tattoo and resealed his Anbu uniform. The moment his mask left his face, the unfiltered air hit his nose and he made a face. The smell was absolutely foul, reeking of thick, sickly sweet air and a pungent odor coming from all around them. It wasn't until he was changing into the provided rags that Naruto noticed that it was coming from his new clothes. He made no comment as Rat got changed next to him, although he idly noticed that the man's lean body was covered in scars and burns. As he was covering his hair with thick, smelly mud, Rat approached Naruto with a small box in his hand. Your voice patterns would give away your cover, the Anbu tracker said. I will craft scar tissue around your throat. For all intent and purposes, you are now mute. Naruto nodded and lifted up his head as Rat deftly dabbed at his neck with the makeup. It tingled on his skin and felt thick and heavy. Once Rat was done, Naruto gingerly touched it and felt a surprisingly rough piece of scar tissue around his throat. He finished wrapping around a grimy bandage around his upper arm, hiding the crimson tattoo behind it while Rat picked up a knobby walking stick. The disguise is complete, Naruto surveyed his form one last time. The rags wrapped around his body made him seem somewhat emancipated and the grime and mud in his hair hid a lot of his features. For all intent and purposes, he looked like a poor, crippled, beggar boy. They followed Rat dutifully out of the safe house and began to approach the town. A small gate had been built on the main road leading out of Taiji, and 3 men wearing flak vests and kiri headbands loitered in the front of it. The lead shinobi them coming and straightened up, looking vaguely interested as the 2 disguised Anbu approached. Papers, he grunted. Rat nodded quickly, his hands shaking as he reached into his robes. The tremors were quite noticeable, and the Kiri-nin frowned as he snatched the papers from Rat's trembling hands. He surveyed them with a frown, although understanding dawned on his face, and when he handed it back he looked a little sympathetic. This seems to be in order, he said somewhat kindly. He was a tall man, grizzled and tough, but there was a glint of compassion as he regarded the 2 apparent travelers. Move along, old-timer. TT thank you, Rat rasped out, his voice hoarse and trembling. Glory to the Mizukage. Glory to the Mizukage, the shinobi responded echoed. Rat took the fraudulent papers back, placed them in his robes and limped on forward, leaning heavily on his stick. Naruto followed him, head ducked down in apparent shyness, and he kept his ears open as he continued. What was that about? One of the other shinobi muttered. He's a survivor from the slaughter of Koyabashi, the first Jonin replied sympathetically. A former chunin who took a lungful of melting mist nasty stuff, that shit is. Fuck. The third shinobi swore in surprise. Isn't that the same shit the Kaguya used at the Black Cliffs? I knew a guy from 5th Battalion, the second shinobi told them, his voice dimming as Naruto and Rat limped away from them. He was never the same afterwards. What about the boy? The asked third shinobi, his voice faint. Just a war brat, the first shinobi said dismissively. Whatever else they said trailed off into the wind as Naruto and Rat entered the town, ready to begin their search. The smell inside Taiji only grew more repugnant as they traveled over the rickety, wet piers. Unlike most places Naruto had visited, this town lacked the proper sewerage facilities, and he saw an old, weathered woman tip a bucket of human waste into the water below them. The piers were old, many of the boards were rotten and falling to pieces, but the locals stepped over them with well-practiced ease. Naruto kept his head down, trailing after the hobbling Rat and hiding his features behind the dirty rags, but surveyed everything around him with a keen gaze. The poverty of this place was quite apparent. Many of the populace wore less than he did, with tattered rags wrapped around their waist and the thin, bony chests exposed to the elements. Mosquitoes buzzed around them, and many of the men and women smelled worse than the putrid water. Dirty, bright-eyed kids darted about the buildings, some running errands or doing small chores while others played with each other. The sound was something else. Naruto had never heard so much cursing and swearing in his life. The workers around them shuffled around in small groups, hollering loudly at each other as they passed the 2 undercover Anbu, spitting thick wads of black tar-like substances out of their mouths and into the water. A nearby woman wearing way too much makeup and showing an indecent amount of cleavage emptied a bag of rubbish into the water below. An old woman, sitting outside her battered, tiny shack, hummed mindlessly to herself as she clicked her knitting needles together, while a tiny, pink-faced babe wailed loudly beside her. It was one of the most interesting places Naruto had ever visited. It was so much different from the cultured capital of the Land of Fire, from the vastness of the manufactorium, or the sleepy villages around Konoha, and not necessarily different in a good way. Naruto passed a bloated, floating corpse just bobbing up and down on the water beneath the pier he was standing on. Milky white eyes stared blankly up at him, a terrified expression permanently twisted on the dead man's face. No, this was not a good place at all. Rat led them towards the warehouse, crossing over metal bridge onto the bank on the other side and approaching it. The architecture around them changed almost instantly as they moved away from the residential slums and towards the modern industrial sector. Great plumes of smoke rose from the chimneys around him, and the streets were paved with cobbled stone. The warehouse loomed up ahead, dominating the skyline and overshadowing all of the other small buildings around it. A constant flow of boats, some small and some large, flowed in and out of the large open warehouse, depositing the goods and leaving as quick as they had come. From what information had been able to gather, the warehouse served as a distribution center for over 50 small islands in the surrounding area. Some of them were single farmhouses, while others were towns the size of slum of Taiji. Each of them was required to pay a regular tithe to the shinobi forces of the Mizukage, and it would all be collected here before being loaded onto huge container ships and departing for Kirigakure. Fish, clams, dried seaweed, livestock and grains, pearls and colored coral, a lot of the expensive imports of the land of water were taken under threat of force for little to no cost. Rat and Naruto entered the warehouse, avoiding the busy workers. A dozen piers had been built into it, extending out to the water, and crates and parcels were unloaded from the docked boats and carried away. Hundreds of people were working around them, but Rat ignored them all, hobbling over to a man in a yellow hard hat. He was short and squat, with an ugly face that's nose had been broken one too many times. As they approached, he glanced up at them with a scowl. Greetings, kind sir," Rat stuttered meekly. His hands twisted nervously, and he licked his lips. For somebody who had come off as quite expressionless, his act seemed genuine. "I am B but a humble W worker, L looking for you," the foreman snapped, his voice surprisingly deep. He brandished his clipboard angrily at Rat. "I told you to fuck off months ago. You have some fucking nerve coming back here, you cockhead." I don't you underst," Rat began. "I've got no work for dirty cheats," the foreman bellowed. He gestured furiously at them. "You stole 1,800 grams of titanium dust from the crates, I fucking know you did. Get out. Get out now, and may the sea serpents strip you of your flesh and grind down your bones." Rat made a squeaking noise, turned around and hurriedly hobbled away. Naruto gave one last lingering look to the foreman and turned to follow the infiltrator. Outside, they leaned against one of the walls, far away from anybody else. Message received. Rat signed beneath his cloak, visible to only Naruto. Rendezvous with resistance contact at 1800 hours slaughterhouse. Understood, Naruto signed. He slumped against the wall, hidden by the shadow of the warehouse and away from the view of the street. Send a message to Team Sigma. We'll wait. The sun had begun to set and a brilliant pinkish, orange glow had filled the sky. It was quite the beautiful sight, highlighting a clump of storm clouds far in the distance. With the light bouncing off the water, it almost made the inlet look beautiful as the light sparkled the thousands of glass bottles bobbing up and down on the surface of the water. Naruto straightened up and exchanged a glance with Rat. Taking a deep breath, and ignoring the stench of the surroundings, the two Anbu slunk out of the shadows and approached the meeting point. During the time they had been waiting, they had investigated their rendezvous point. It was one of the smaller buildings tucked underneath the shadow of the warehouse. A small, separate path led from the back of the warehouse to the slaughterhouse, allowing workers to shepherd the newly arrived livestock to their deaths. It was a mostly automated system, run by a complex set of machines that spun blades and removed grinded-up grizzle. The two entered the slaughterhouse, the stench of fresh, bloodied meat quite apparent. The machines still whirred and whined, but there wasn't a soul in sight. Rat and Naruto walked past the machines and the assembly track, keeping a careful eye on their surroundings. It was a tense situation, and Naruto didn't like it. It wasn't as if he thought Rat was untrustworthy, he certainly seemed to have the Hokage's confidence, but he didn't like going into things unprepared. Besides, it had been a long time since Rat had had contact with the resistance. Maybe things had changed. Maybe their contact had been turned, or was working with the loyalists. This would be an excellent site for an ambush, and there would be little Naruto could do to keep the secrecy of his mission intact if they were attacked. It would inevitably lead to pandemonium if they had to fight their way out, and while he was confident that Team Sigma could handle the caliber of the Kiri-nin he had seen so far, he wasn't so keen on taking on reinforcements that would surge towards him at the first hint of trouble. Suddenly, a loud clanging noise echoed around the slaughterhouse. The whirring machines around them began to die down and several of the lights went out. Naruto tensed, his fingers twitching, but he had no weapons to grip. He kept his eyes around them, becoming very still as silhouettes started to appear around them. First one, and then three, and then a dozen. They were surrounded. Hidden in the shadows, it was hard to see the newcomers. Beside him, Rat made no attempt to hide or take a defensive position, so Naruto exhaled softly and lowered his arms. His heart was racing, his mouth dry. Loud footsteps approached them, a single pair of legs. A figure emerged from the shadows, her arms folded over a rather bountiful chest and a rather amused-looking expression on her face. Beautiful, long, crimson hair swayed down to her waist, covering a lot of her dirty flak vest. A lock of hair covered up much of the right side of her face, while her left green eye glinted somewhat dangerously. Brown bandages were wrapped around her forearms, and she wore a set of dark pants and sandals. From what Naruto could tell, she was beautiful, buxom, and incredibly dangerous. He had read profile reports on notable shinobi in the Land of Water, and he had even seen a poorly captured grainy photograph of her before. Terumi May of the Resistance eyed the two undercover Anbu in front of her. Well, she practically purred. I thought I had something scurrying about. What can the Resistance do for its favorite little rat? According to the classified and heavily censored information that Naruto had been allowed to access prior to the mission, Terumi May was one of the most powerful shinobi in the Land of Water. A dual bloodline wielder, she was capable of utilizing extremely powerful lava release and boil release techniques to great effects. How a bloodline such as lava release, which was native to the Land of Earth, had ended in the Land of Water was much cause of speculation. As far as Konoha sources knew, there was no record of a Terumi bloodline clan, and some analysts suggested that she was most likely the bastard offspring of an Iwanin and a Land of Water native. Nonetheless, her possible origins weren't quite as interesting as her present activities. Terumi May was one of the leading shinobi within the Resistance, and perhaps their strongest. Her techniques were devastatingly powerful and quite likely some of the strongest in the world. She was courageous and calm in battle and an inspiring leader to her soldiers. It was suggested that she was one of the few shinobi within the Resistance that could possibly go toe-to-toe with the fourth Mizukage, and although rumors persisted of such a battle, no credible information had been gathered. She was powerful. She was beautiful. She was extremely dangerous. And she was standing in front of two undercover Anbu operatives from Konoha, her arms folded, smiling slightly as she regarded them with gleaming eyes. Her long crimson hair covered part of her face, but the rest displayed an emotion that could have been mistaken for amusement, were it not for the dozen soldiers she had surrounded them with. Terumi-sama, Rat greeted coolly, seemingly unfazed by the sudden appearance of what could possibly be an S-rank shinobi. I was unaware that you yourself would be meeting with us. May smiled. It was a beautiful smile, but it sent an involuntary shiver down Naruto's back. How could I stay away when I heard my favorite pet was in town? She responded huskily. She leaned forward, giving Rat a smoldering look. You've been gone for so long, I was beginning to think you didn't care. Rat didn't respond, and he seemed unconcerned with the woman's suggestive smile and overt behavior. Naruto remained where he was, keeping his face as blank as possible. May's emerald green eyes flickered over to him, and despite her appearance and tone so far, when she raked her eyes up and down his body, Naruto was sure that the woman had just calmly and quickly analyzed every single facet of his appearance. The blonde shifted on his feet, slightly moving his head to exchange a look with Rat. Rat nodded imperceptibly and Naruto cleared his throat, taking a step forward. Terumi May, he began, but then he had to stop as May gasped. Oh, my, she murmured, holding her hands to her cheeks and looking positively scandalized. You're so young. Her crimson lips widened and she subtly angled her body towards him suggestively. What's a cute little boy doing in a place like this? Naruto felt a flicker of annoyance at being referred to as a little boy, but he brushed it aside. It was exactly what this woman wanted from him, and he made a mental note to amend her file when he returned to Konoha. May seemed to enjoy trying to get a rise out of others. I am here representing a third party, Naruto began as tonelessly as possible. We are searching for a man who was last seen working for the Resistance. You may know him. His name is Yamashita Kazuya. May nodded thoughtfully at the name. It may ring a bell, she murmured. She gave them a slow, lazy smile. But it's hard to tell. Just out of curiosity though, what would a pair of Black Ops boys like you want with such a man? We've been hired to retrieve him from the Land of Water and take him home, Naruto answered. Purely for his own protection, he added sincerely. We're here to help him. May considered that. What if, she began, licking her lips. What if such a man, if I knew him, didn't want to leave? Our client was very insistent, Naruto replied. He gave May a level stare. He needs to come home. May made a tsk noise. See, that won't do, she told them cheerfully. Her tone took on a slight edge, and her ever-present smile dimming somewhat. You see, if I knew such a man, I'm sure he would be a great asset to the resistance, May continued. He would be a good man trying to help the people who needed it the most. He would want to stay here, where he could do the most good, and he wouldn't care what his family wanted. She raised her hand and snapped her fingers, and suddenly the dozen shinobi that lay in the shadows stirred, each taking a single step forward. Naruto drew back, eyes flickering all around him, and the chakra welled up beneath his skin. His fists tightened as he mentally calculated their odds, revising exactly which techniques he would use if needed. May looked as carefree and relaxed as possible, but there was something dangerous in her smile. Just as I don't care what your client wants, the redhead continued. She uncrossed her arms and jabbed a finger in Naruto's direction. This is the land of water. The affairs of the outside don't mean anything here. Your client, no matter how powerful, means nothing. You mean nothing. Don't forget that. Naruto took a deep breath and exhaled slowly, trying to think of another way to approach this. During the short break, Rat intervened. We have done much to help the resistance, the Black Ops operative said quietly. May shifted her burning emerald gaze to the oldest of the pair. We have supplied you with weapons, gathered important intelligence for you, conducted surgical strikes against the Mizukage's forces. He made a motion with his hand. These are no little things. Now May's smile disappeared completely, and her face was completely smooth and emotionless. Are you suggesting that we're indebted to you? May asked in barely more than a whisper. Rat cocked his head. Precisely that, he replied stoically. So far, we have asked for nothing. It seemed to be getting a bit warmer, a remarkable fact given the humidity, and the air around the redhead seemed to be shimmering. At the very edge of his senses, Naruto could feel a massive well of power building up. Truly, the woman in front of him was powerful. Operations into the land of water are to resume shortly, Rat continued unhurriedly, unaware or unconcerned with May's rapidly darkening mood. Her face looked as if it were carved from marble. We are prepared to once again assist the resistance with their fight. Yamashita Kazuya may be an asset to your cause, but I'm sure that we would be an ever greater one. May considered that. By the look on her face and the narrowing of her eyes, the unvoiced threat had not gone unnoticed. As per the Hokage's instructions, if the resistance would not cooperate in the retrieval of the target, Team Sigma was fully authorized to officially pull any further support. It was a cruel, underhanded tactic. The resistance needed all of the help it could get, and couldn't afford to alienate any international aid that was being offered to them. Of course we would welcome your support, May responded after a few moments. Her voice had brightened, but for a moment, Naruto thought there may have been something like a trace of bitterness in her reply. However, I'm not quite sure we can rely on it. She folded her arms, giving Rat a pointed look. Your team left right in the middle of a critical operation, she said quietly. Her eyes narrowed. We had to pull back. We lost Delta sight, and Yagura was able to retake the depot. It set us back 3 months. It cost us lives. Unavoidable, Rat declared flatly. We were recalled. Your orders do not take precedence over the orders of superiors. May smiled pleasantly. I'm sure it's a just coincidence that you left just as reports filtered into Kirigakure about an aerial bombardment over Konoha, she noted carelessly. Rat didn't say anything, and Naruto gave a half shrug. Konoha was weakened, he supplied. A faint smile crossed his face. There was an opportunity, however brief, to take action. Our village wanted all forces available just in case. I see. Judging by the knowing smile, it was obvious that May didn't believe them. Officially, the resistance were unaware of just who was supplying them with aid. If they were to win, naturally Konoha would reveal themselves to the new leadership and reap the diplomatic benefits. If the resistance were to lose, however, there could be no evidence that Konoha had been involved in any revolutionary action. Unofficially, Naruto was pretty sure that May had a fair idea on exactly which village both he and Rat came from. In any case, trust was broken, May said. She smiled at them and leaned forward, giving Naruto a little wink. I think you might need to do something to help rebuild that trust. Are you really in a position to negotiate? Naruto asked bluntly. Are you really in a position to refuse? May countered smoothly. You need me to help complete your mission. I know your target and his familial connections. The reward for the completion of this mission must be substantial for your village to risk such an operation. You won't get it without my help. We've assisted your forces before, and we're prepared to do it again, answered Naruto, a frown crossing his face. So, if we help you now, you might help us in the future. Mei smiled coyly, and shook her head. Oh, no, if you want our help now, then you'll have to do something for us now. What do you want? Naruto asked bluntly. The sun outside the deserted slaughterhouse was going down, and the only light inside came from the dim lighting from the various machines around them. The members of the resistance around them remained alert and tense, and Rat held back as Naruto and Mei regarded each other challengingly, the latter running a hand through her long, red hair. Mei pondered, raising a finger to her chin thoughtfully. You know, I don't really know, she answered cheerfully. I'm sure you two and the other 6 operatives you have outside the town would be able to assist us with something. Naruto stilled, something Mei noticed immediately, and her smile widened. Oh, I know, she exclaimed with a snap of her fingers. She gestured at Naruto. We're going to be running a little mission in the next couple of days. You can help us with that. What type of mission? Naruto asked cautiously. There's a factory on a nearby island, Mei answered. She licked her lips. Most of the supply lines have been broken, so Yagura's had to start making his own weapons. We haven't had a shipment from the manufactorium in years, yet somehow, Yagura's forces always have bulk quantities of explosive tags, and they're coming from that factory. Naruto's eyes widened. It's very annoying, Mei continued. She shook her head thoughtfully. I have no idea where he got the technology. Oh, I've seen it around, Naruto murmured. He ignored Mei's speculative gaze as a prickling sensation ran up his arms. He had seen the technology before in the form of a small, portable printing press. Although he wasn't quite sure how it worked, he knew that it was the first machine capable of printing explosive tags of bulk found outside the huge facilities of the manufactorium. It was a game changer and it had come from the enemy, the enigmatic orange-masked man who had been at the forefront of Konoha's problems for the last few months. Did he have something to do with the situation in the Land of Water? Naruto broke out of his thoughts and shook his head. We're not here to start a war, he replied firmly. We don't have any orders to run missions against the Mizukage. I can't authorize this. We'll disguise you as resistance members, Mei countered. She smiled beautifully down at him. We're simply pressed for manpower in this region. 8 more skilled shinobi would easily turn the tide in our favor. Naruto glanced at Rat, who stared back at him blankly. The captain's mind was churning furiously as he considered his prospects. Sasuke and Daichi were out if worst came to worst and there were casualties, their bloodlines would automatically reveal Konoha's presence in the Land of Water. Toa had been imprinted with a sealing technique of Konoha's design, so he couldn't participate either, and he would need to leave a senior John and either Cage of Komaki in command. I could supply you with a squad of 4, Naruto said carefully. Mei smiled. But I want to see our target first, Naruto finished. He gave Mei a steady look. That's non-negotiable. I won't authorize anything without seeing our mission priority. Mei nodded. Very well, she replied. She gestured to the doorway. We'll go and retrieve the rest of your team, and then you can follow us. I'll take you to him now. Naruto and Rat followed Mei and her forces out of the slaughterhouse. Their rendezvous hadn't drawn any attention, and they were quite easily able to slip out of the town without drawing any notice. They were in a fairly remote region, and while the Mizukage had increased security in the area since the discovery of resistance activity, it had mostly been a token force of undertrained shinobi led by a handful of experienced officers. The sky was a mixture of orange and purple, and it cast a beautiful glow down on the water surrounding the large island. Sticking to the shadows, the group of revolutionaries avoided guards and patrols and approached the safe house where the rest of Team Sigma waited. Mei and her shinobi paused at the perimeter, while Naruto and Rat went on ahead. Daichi had obviously alerted the rest of the team because they were waiting for them as Naruto entered the clearing around the tiny safe house. The blonde approached Cage, who nodded respectfully at Naruto's return. Captain, the older man greeted coolly. As he spoke, his fingers flashed. Unknown shinobi contact at perimeter. We've brought company, Naruto responded, his fingers flashing in reply. Established contact with local resistance cell, we will be lead to the mission priority. Understood. Cage nodded. He gestured to the rest of the team. We are ready to move out. Follow me, Naruto commanded. Assume double triad formation relations with resistance. A strained prepare for possible ambush. He led the rest of Team Sigma back to the resistance. Naruto, Kage and Toa took the lead, while Sasuke, Yuka and Daichi took the rear, with Rat and Komaki in the center, ready to redeploy and assist each fire team if necessary. They met with Mei in the tree line, the beautiful redhead waiting patiently. 4 grim-faced shinobi flanked her, and Naruto caught sight of several others in the trees around them. He had counted at least 11 resistance members, and with his team backing him up, the odds were much more even now should the worst occur. After you, Naruto said dryly, gesturing at Mei. Mei placed a hand on her cheek. What a polite young man, she beamed. She gave Naruto a flirtatious wink. Follow me, Captain Cutie. Naruto stared blankly after her as she turned and began to lead him out of forest. As Team Sigma followed the resistance members, the blonde captain kept surveying his surroundings, trying to place their location and movement to the map he had memorized. As he did so, he caught Yuka's hands flashing at Daichi. Don't like her, Yuka's movements were sharp. Stealing my nickname, that's just. The Yamanaka must have felt Naruto's gaze because her head shot up. At the slight, puzzled tilt of his head, Yuka's hands dropped and she shook her head. Naruto frowned behind his mask but turned around, continuing the silent journey through the island. The resistance either had extremely good senses amongst them, or they knew the movements of the loyalist shinobi forces very well, because they didn't encounter a single one as they traveled south towards the coast. Instead of sinking below the waves, Mei led the group on top of the water and they sprinted along the swells. The resistance members did it much better than the undercover Anbu, using an interesting variation of water walking that almost looked like water skiing. It was a tiring journey for some, less so for Naruto who had chakra to burn, and he could practically feel the relief emanating from some of the chunin in his squad when the dot of land they were approaching grew larger and larger. By the time they arrived at the beach, night had overtaken them. They were far away from the light pollution of the large villages and cities, and the thousands of stars above them shone down on them beautifully. The water around them gleamed with the reflected light, and the full moon cast a brilliant glow down on them. With the sound of the lapping waves around them and the drop in temperature, the island felt like a perfect holiday destination. The arrival of 20 shinobi somewhat spoiled the ambience. Naruto signaled his team to stop as they came to rest at the head of the beach. It rose up in a slope, and beyond that they could see a few twinkling lights in the distance. The wind brushed gently against his hair as he approached Mei. From his mental calculations, they had traveled 240 kilometers southeast towards one of the countless smaller islands of the Land of Water archipelago. We're here, Mei said cheerfully. She shook her long mane of hair, smoothing out some of the water, and pointed at the twinkling lights. That's where we'll find our friend. She pointed at one of shinobi and her fingers twisted. It was gibberish to Naruto, but obviously meant something to the shinobi because he nodded and disappeared into the darkness. Just letting them know that we're coming, Mei answered Naruto's unspoken question. Your squad should probably hang back, no need to scare the poor man. Naruto nodded in acquiescence. You might want to consider taking off your mask, too, Mei added. It's very scary. I can't do that, Naruto responded shortly. Mei pouted. How disappointing, she practically purred. She reached out and Naruto resisted the urge to flinch as she ran her fingertips down the smooth, white porcelain. I bet you're a cutie underneath that thing. One part of Naruto knew exactly what the older woman was trying to do, and he even resented the attempt. He wasn't some green genin who was going to splutter out village secrets at the slightest hint of female attention, a flush of embarrassment. The other, smaller part idly noted that Mei was truly one of the most beautiful women he had ever seen, and he felt a flush of warmth spread through his body at her close proximity. He could practically feel her breath against her face despite his mask, and he cleared his throat and took a step backwards. My appearance is irrelevant, Naruto countered as coolly as possible. Mei's smile was victorious as she leaned back, and she folded her arms. No need to get testy, she remarked warmly. She gave him a wink. I'm sure you're a very fine-looking boy. Naruto ignored her and turned back to his team. Despite their masks, he could practically feel the smirk on Toa's face, and Yuka seemed strangely subdued. Toa, take watch, Naruto ordered with a hint of dark satisfaction. Toa acknowledged his orders with a small, resigned sigh. Stand down and rest. I'll approach the target alone. You'll know if I need backup. The rest of the squad acknowledged his orders as Naruto turned back to Mei. If this was some kind of ambush or trap, or if he and his squad were in danger, they would all know soon enough. He had no intention of going down quietly if worst came to absolute worst. The chakra of the nine-tailed demon fox would hopefully be enough to break through any attack and allow Team Sigma to retreat. Mei's messenger returned, and the redhead turned to Naruto. Shall we? She asked. Naruto followed Mei, and the two of them left the little beach. After a few minutes, they approached a small little farmstead. A couple of fenced-off fields stretched out beyond it, and rows of crops grew up past Naruto's height. There was a small shed to the left, and he could hear the rustle of animals, a dozen or so sheep, by the look of it. The house was rather small, made of white painted wood, and a small vegetable garden grew at the front. All in all, it looked like a nice and quiet place to live even if it was located in the middle of a war-torn country under the brutal rule of a genocidal Jinchuriki. Mei climbed up the stairs to the porch with Naruto by her side, and she knocked on the door. There was movement from the windows, the curtains rustling, and then footsteps approached the other side of the door. It opened, revealing a slender woman. Her skin was bronze from exposure to the sun, her teeth were brilliantly white, and her bleached blonde hair fell past her shoulders. Blue eyes stared at Naruto in mistrust, and she wordlessly stepped aside, allowing the two shinobi to enter. Naruto walked into the house and the smell of flowers and incense bypassed his mask's filters. Candles burned in little alcoves in the walls, providing a soft glow around the house. They were led to the kitchen to a small dining table. Half-finished plates had been stacked on the bench, and a gas lamp burned on the center of the table. On the other side was a large, dark-skinned man. His shaggy white hair had been cropped, his muscular, tanned arms were folded and his dark eyes regarded them carefully. He wore a simple vest and pants, and his feet were bare. It's nice to see you again, Mei, Yamashita Kazuya said. He eyed Naruto with an indecipherable look. I'm not so sure about the company you're keeping, mind you. Mei shrugged. He was very insistent on meeting you, she explained with an easy smile. Well, go on, Kazuya prompted. He didn't look impressed. You wanted my attention. Well, you've got it. My team and I have been hired to retrieve you from the land of water and escort you home, Naruto said politely. We're glad to see that you're in good health, especially given the state of the land of water and the fall of the water court. My health is fine, Kazuya replied crisply. And I have no intention of returning home. I'm sorry for wasting your time. Naruto paused. My client was very insistent that you come home, he said carefully. There was a tense silence. Next to him, Mei was silent, and the kitchen suddenly felt very small. I'm not going, Kazuya repeated firmly. He stood up. You need to leave now. Naruto didn't move. His mind was racing, and he was very well aware of Mei's presence next to him. Is there any particular reason you don't want to come with us? He asked, ignoring the order to leave. Kazuya frowned. Yes, he responded shortly, but he refused to elaborate. I see, Naruto answered quietly. He bit his lip. Our orders did state that if you didn't want to come willingly, we were able to forcefully retrieve you. Kazuya straightened, his face darkening, and Mei mildly cleared her throat next to him. That might be a mistake, she suggested neutrally. Naruto exhaled noisily. I understand why you wanted to stay, he told Kazuya. I've been to the wall. I've seen the runners. I've even helped save a few. What's happening here is horrible. But really, what can you do here? I do whatever I can, Kazuya retorted firmly. I help the resistance with anything they need. You could do more at home, Naruto suggested earnestly. Kazuya opened his mouth, but Naruto continued on hurriedly. Your uncle holds you in high regard. He misses you. He believes you are a good person. You have influence over him. If you go home, you can do more for the resistance and the people of the land of water there than you could ever possibly do here. A flicker of doubt crossed Kazuya's face, but the stubbornness returned. I said no, he snapped, his voice rising. I'm not going. Naruto, who had been eyeing the surroundings, took a deep breath. And what about your children? He asked. Kazuya jerked as if struck, and Naruto pointed to the half-finished plates on the bench. There are 4 plates, one for you, one for your wife, and 2 smaller portions for your children. Is this the kind of place you want to raise them? Kazuya was silent. What do you think will happen to them if the Mizukage discovers your loyalties? Naruto pressed on. The resistance will protect us, Kazuya shot back. Mei was strangely silent. What if the resistance lose? Naruto continued resolutely. What if they can't make it in time? He leaned forward intently. I've seen what the hunters do to traitors. There's no mercy, even for the children. I've seen babies impaled on swords, children cut down. Stop trying to scare me. Kazuya's voice rose into an angry bellow, and he slammed his hands down on the table. I know what they do. I was there for the fall of the water court, the massacre of Hook Bay, and the sacking of Shimakapu. I've seen things you need to consider. I'm not going. Kazuya continued, interrupting Naruto. He glared at the masked boy. And even if you manage to force me to come, the moment I get back, I'll be sending a message to the 4th Mizukage. I'll let everybody know what happened. I'll make it a public event. What do you think your village would think about that? Naruto took a deep breath. Then consider this, he responded coldly. My village has been supplying the resistance with aid for years. We've sent teams in to help fight against the Mizukage. Apparently we've been very useful. Kazuya glanced at Mei, who nodded shortly. If you don't come with us, our village isn't sending any more teams in, Naruto continued. He jabbed a finger in Kazuya's direction. No more aid. No more supplies. No more shinobi. That will all be on your head. Kazuya looked stricken. He turned to Mei, a pleading expression on his face. Mei, he began. Mei shook her head, her voice sympathetic. I can't control the decisions of his village, she answered quietly. We don't need them, but their assistance is very much welcome. That said, the decision is up to you. She placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. You've helped us in the past and we owe you a lot. If you decide to stay and they pull out, we would still be in your debt. Kazuya glared at Naruto. You bastard, he hissed furiously. Naruto knew he was right. He felt a flash of guilt, but ruthlessly suppressed it. We can exfiltrate you and your family, he said soothingly. Once you're back home, you can start rallying support for the resistance. You might even be able to push for a village-sanctioned operation. Nobody is very happy with what's going on here. You might be able to help create a unified task force. If I agreed, Kazuya stressed, then we would all have to go with you. We can take your family, Naruto assured. Kazuya smiled tightly. No, I mean all of us. He gestured out of the window. I help run a series of hidden shelters on the surrounding islands. Political opponents of the Mizukage, bloodline children too young to fight, men and women opposed to the ideals of Kirigakure, I help shelter them all. Naruto frowned. How many? 38, Kazuya answered. He folded his arms. If I'm going, we're all going. Those are my terms. No negotiation. Naruto was shaking his head. That's impossible, he said. 4 would work. 38 would be impossible. We can't possibly smuggle that many people out. Figure something out, Kazuya said dismissively. And if you can't, then I won't be going anywhere. You can leave now. Naruto hesitated, but he nodded grudgingly. I'll be in touch, he murmured as he turned around. Mei stayed behind for a few moments while Naruto walked back towards the beach, and then she caught up to him. She regarded him with a casual smile, looking seemingly at ease. You seem to be in a predicament, she noted cheerfully. Naruto ignored her. He approached the beach and signaled to his team. Form a defensive perimeter, he called. We'll be here for the night. Rat, come with me. We need to discuss our exit strategy. Are you really going to do it? Mei asked curiously. Do I have a choice? Naruto shot back in annoyance. Mei chuckled. Well, we'll stay here for the night as well. It's been a long day for us. She turned, relaying a series of orders to her forces, only stopping to look over her shoulder. Don't do anything foolish. It would be a terrible shame if any incidents were to occur. It would be, Naruto agreed softly. Your loss would be a devastating blow to the resistance. Mei actually laughed at that. Bold and funny. I like you. Naruto ignored her as he walked away. It was past midnight, and despite several hours of strategizing, Naruto still hadn't formed a plan he was happy with. Trying to leave the land of water with a small group was definitely possible. They could leave the same way they came, each operative carrying an extra person. There was enough surplus equipment to outfit Kazuya and his family with everything necessary to survive the long underwater journey from the land of water back to the land of waves, although the civilians would have found it much less comfortable than the shinobi. 38 people, however, were beyond them, and Naruto couldn't devise any other strategy that he was confident in. It would have been easy to commandeer a ship, but then the Kirinin would have been on them as soon as the alert was raised, and it would have been a fighting retreat back into friendly territory. The only shipping lane to the mainland led directly to Bloody Cove, and that was a fortress of Kirinin, and it would be virtually impossible to slip past them. In the end, Naruto was forced to concede that he was going to need some help. May, Naruto called as he approached the resistance camp. The two forces had camped on either side of the small beach they had landed on. Team Sigma kept a very careful watch on the ocean and the other resistance shinobi, and Naruto was sure that they were doing the same thing. The atmosphere was quite tense, and given how May had placed her forces, it was obvious that she suspected that Naruto might simply snatch Kazuya from his bed. He had considered it. But May was meant to be an extremely powerful shinobi. Intel on her was sparse, but anybody capable of fighting against a cage-level opponent was somebody to be wary of. Even if Naruto could match her, the fight would undoubtedly be destructive and would surely attract the attention of loyalist forces. Besides, Naruto personally approved of what May was doing. The fourth Mizukage was a terrible person, and anybody fighting him was somebody to be respected. The last thing he wanted to do was weaken the resistance and strengthen Yagura's regime. May looked up, a slow, knowing smile spreading over her face. "Hello, my mysterious Black Ops friend," she greeted. She patted the rock next to the one she was sitting on. "Sit. I'm sure we have lots to talk about." Naruto sat down next to her and together they looked out at the dark ocean water. Some clouds had blotted out a lot of the moonlight, but there was still enough light available to see May's features. She looked quite amused, and Naruto steeled himself. "If we're going to do this, then we're going to need the help of the resistance," he admitted. "You know the land, the environment and the enemy better than we do." May giggled and patted him on the back. "That must have hurt," she said sympathetically. She sighed. "I've been thinking about it, actually. It's possible, but we're going to need a distraction." "What do you think?" Naruto asked. "That weapons factory we're going to attack will be a good start," May elaborated. Her voice took on a slightly brisker tone. "We attack the factory together. Nearby forces will be on alert, and reinforcements will be diverted north. We split up. One group will perform a fighting retreat, distracting the enemy as long as possible. One group will head south, attacking a supply depot to draw even more attention, while one will head east. The group heading east will destroy a Kiri naval patrol, and then make for the mainland." Naruto's eyes widened as he listened to May lay out her incredibly complex plan. "At the same time, we'll commandeer the next freighter taking goods to the Bloody Cove. We have the latest flag signals, and we have men in the port. We'll load up the refugees and hide them in the carts. I'll arrange for my men to do the inspections, and then when we leave for the hub, we'll dispose of our guard. It won't take them long to figure out what's going on, but by then the first group would have hit the mainland and we'll take out the communications post at Cape Wazaki. At the same time, a resistance cell will infiltrate and destroy a weapons cache south of the cove, and hopefully we'll draw out most of the experienced shinobi to our locations. We'll defeat them, retreat back to the border and rendezvous at the hub." There was a long silence. "That's very elaborate," Naruto said after a few moments. He gave her a considering look. "You're quite good at this." May smiled. "I'm not just a pretty face," she said. "Although, my face is very pretty." She winked at him, and Naruto was surprised with himself when he chuckled. "It sounds good." He nodded thoughtfully. "I'll have to run it by my team and think about it, but it's better than anything we've come up with." He paused. "Why help us though?" May shrugged. "A number of reasons," she answered. She held up a hand, ticking the points off her fingers. "It pisses Yagura off. It strengthens our cause. It'll be great for morale. We'll get an ally in the Lightning Court. Plus, it's always good when Konoha owes us one." "Konoha?" Naruto asked as innocently as possible. "Unless you've defected, I'm quite sure that you're from Konoha, Uzumaki." Naruto, May said knowingly. She smiled at his stony silence. "Even Yagura's heard of you, and what he knows, we tend to find out pretty soon. You can disguise yourself as much as you want, but there's only so many short, young, powerful Anbu running around the world." Naruto frowned. "Besides," May added, "what other village would have the sheer nerve to strut into the land of water and act like they own the place?" It wasn't said with any hostility. Naruto didn't deny or confirm her suspicions. "Anyway, let's sleep on it." May changed the subject rather cheerfully. "We'll have a strategy meeting tomorrow and work out the finer details." Naruto nodded and stood up. You're welcome to stay here, May called out invitingly as he departed. He shook his head and rolled his eyes, hearing her chuckles and feeling her eyes on him as he left. The night passed quickly. Team Sigma had set up a small encampment away from the beach, and many of them slumbered, wrapped up with camouflaged blankets. Daichi especially slept deeply, having exhausted himself with his constant use of the Byakugan. Naruto took the chance to rest, but spent most of the night in conference with his team. A weapons factory and a communications post, Toa deadpanned. Wow, she doesn't want much, does she? Was there anything else she wanted us to do, or was this going to be enough? She did ask me to sleep with her, Naruto remarked offhandedly. Next to him, Yuka froze. Her mask was off, and she had paused mid-chew, a ration bar dangling from her fingers. Toa looked impressed, and gave Naruto a sleazy smirk. Niece, he whistled, then grimaced as Komaki elbowed him in the stomach. It was obviously a ploy, she snapped. Regardless, Naruto interjected with some amusement. We need to work out how we're going to do this. Kazuya won't go without the rest of them, and we can't smuggle out 38 people without the Resistance's help. Could we snatch and grab? Toa asked. Naruto shook his head. The Resistance won't let us, and they outnumber us, he answered. Besides, I wouldn't want to take on May unless I really had to. Wouldn't want to hurt your new girlfriend? Yuka asked dryly. Might not be able to, Naruto replied seriously. He folded his arms over his chest. She's one of the most powerful women I've ever met. From what we know of her, her ninjutsu is extremely powerful, probably better than my own. Rat nodded. She is very skilled, he told them quietly. I would suggest you do not make an enemy of her unless you have to. So we'll work within her plan, Naruto concluded. This means we'll be working with her people, so you're going to need some temporary codenames. I don't want the Resistance knowing any more about us than they have to. Can we pick our names? Toa asked eagerly. Naruto gave him a deadpan expression. Shut up, number 4. Toa considered it. Could be worse, he muttered after a moment. Naruto's lips twitched. We'll do by seniority. I'm number 1, Kage is number 2 and Komaki is number 3. Toa, you know, then Daichi is number 5 and Yuka is number 6. Sasuke can be number 7 and Rat, since you're an attached advisor, you're number 8. He leaned in, rubbing his hands together. Now, let's work out the details. By the time morning approached, Team Sigma had worked out most of the specifics for May's plan. Good morning, my favorite little shinobi, May greeted as the sun began to rise. She winked at him as she approached the small camp, flanked by 2 members of the Resistance. One was a relatively large man with 3 broad, blue striped markings on his face. He wore a standard bodysuit, covered with a dark blue robe with light blue trimming. His eyes were covered with tinted red googles, he wore a blue bandana over his head, and a strange purple necklace was draped around his neck. The other was a slender boy, only a few years older than Naruto. He had shorty, spiky black hair and black eyes, and was clad in black turtleneck and a dark gray flak jacket. His face seemed to be twisted in a permanent scowl, but it seemed to deepen as he eyed the undercover agents. Their leader, May, looked as stunning as ever. Her red hair spilled over her back and hid one of her green eyes from view, contrasting beautifully with her pale skin, and her flak jacket couldn't hide the woman's curves. She joined Naruto and gestured him to walk with her, while her 2 guards fell back to a respectful distance. I trust that you had a pleasant night? May asked. Pleasant enough, Naruto answered. The pair of them walked towards the beach, where the rising sun had made the ocean before them sparkle like diamonds. A soft, warm breeze blew around them, and the sound of waves lapping at the beach was quite relaxing. Despite the history and bloodshed of the Land of Water, Naruto could truly see the appeal in living here. Have you considered my proposal? May asked as she stared out into the water. Naruto gave a short nod. We agree to your plan, he replied. May looked pleased. Then, let's go over the plan. It was a curious group of shinobi that met at Kazuya's cottage. His wife had taken the family away, and Kazuya himself sat at the head of the living table, his arms folded. Both May and Naruto sat on the other side of the table, and surrounding them were over a dozen shinobi. They crowded around them, squashed in the small room, a mixture of Resistance and Anbu operatives. The air, while not decidedly hostile, wasn't necessarily warm and friendly. A map lay on the table before them, covered in tiny marks. Welcome to the joint briefing, May began, her lips twisting into a beautiful smile. We're here to go over the particular details. Number 1, and here she looked extremely amused, meet one of my senior commanders, Chukichi. One of her guards from before, the large man with the blue striped cheeks and tinted glasses, gave a shallow nod of greeting. Chukichi will be leading Bravo Squad, May continued. I will be leading Alpha Squad for the first half of the mission, and then my forces will relocate to our secondary objective while Number 1 continues on with the mission. This had been a minor point of contention with Naruto, and he didn't like how Team Sigma was essentially subordinate to the Resistance commanders. Nonetheless, May had been adamant, and it did make sense. The Resistance knew the terrain better than they did, and they had a far greater understanding of the enemy, their tactics and composition, than Team Sigma did. Number 3, Number 6, Number 8 and I will be attached with Alpha Squad, Naruto spoke up. He gestured to the map. We'll accompany May to the weapons factory here. Number 2, 4, 5 and 7 will go with Bravo Squad. You'll commandeer the freighter Atakebune departing from Taiji. Delta Squad will rendezvous with you here, he jabbed at the map, and the packages will be loaded on. After the factory is destroyed, I'll take my forces and we'll split up, May continued. I'll engage the enemy forces, hindering them as long as possible. One of my lieutenants will move south, attacking another loyalist installation. Number 1 will take his squad east, destroying a small naval patrol and commandeering a boat to make for the mainland. If we time it right, you should hit the mainland about 15 minutes before the Atakebune about 14-20 hours. My squad will take out this communications post north of the Bloody Cove, up at Cape Wazaki, Naruto pointed at the map. His brow was furrowed behind his mask as he kept running through the numbers even as he spoke. Ow, another of my shinobi, will attack south of the Bloody Cove at 14-25 hours, destroying a small weapons cache. With the simultaneous attack from the north and south, Kirigaku's Anbu, Tide, will be forced to split up. May leaned back in her chair, smiling in satisfaction. Naruto nodded. The Atakebune should land at about 14:35 hours, a few moments before the distress calls arrive at the port, he continued. The Resistance has men on the inside that should be able to pass you through customs quickly. We'll distribute the packages around 6 merchant wagons, and by 1500 hours, you should be out of the city and on the way to the hub. Once you've passed the border, my team will move north towards the Land of Waves, and go the long way into the Land of Fire. From there, we'll avoid local forces and escort our package into the Land of Lightning. That last part was a lie. May have known that they were from Konoha, but she didn't know, and Naruto wasn't going to do or say anything that will legitimize her suspicions. The Resistance will leave you there, May concluded. She moved forward, bringing up an arm to ruffle Naruto's hair, despite his annoyance. And that could be the end of our relationship, my little cutie. What a shame, Naruto responded dryly. May chuckled as Naruto turned to his team. It was impossible to determine their expressions, but none of the members of Team Sigma showed any visible signs of discontent. He eyed each of them and gave them a brief nod. We're on a timetable, he said quietly. So make sure you synchronize your times. Otherwise, let's move out. May chuckled as she stood. My, she murmured, this is going to be fun. It was a busy morning. Naruto had spent most of it going over the finer details of the mission with Kage, the leader of Team Sigma's detachment to Bravo Squad. Kazuya's little island cottage was becoming crowded as more Resistance members began to show up. Messages had been sent late last night to nearby cells, and they arrived not long after the mission briefing. It was as if May had already known that Naruto was going to agree to her proposition. It was either that, or she had been preparing just in case he had said no. Shinobi were divvied out. Mission groups were created. Supplies were given out. A small squad of Resistance shinobi left before the rest, traveling to the nearby islands where Kazuya had sheltered enemies of state so that they would be ready when the time comes. Finally, at noon, Alpha and Bravo squads were ready. They gathered on the beach. Naruto stood next to May at the head of Alpha Squadron. Behind him, Komaki, Yuka and Rat stood amongst 6 other Resistance shinobi. The spiky-haired teen from before was among them, as well as 5 others experienced-looking men and women. Next to them was Bravo Squad. Kage stood with Chukichi, and behind him was Sasuke, Daichi and Toa, as well as another 5 Resistance members. With a small team of 5 gathering up the refugees, and a team of 8 preparing to strike on the mainland, there were almost 40 shinobi involved in the mission. Naruto had never been involved in an operation that utilized such numbers. Usually, it was him, with a small group such as Team Sigma backing him up. He found it hard to keep up with the numbers and strategies, and he was almost thankful that he wasn't in charge of the mission. Bravo squad, are you ready? Mei asked loudly. Chukichi nodded, while many of the resistance shinobi nodded and murmured in assent. The leaf nin amongst them were silent and motionless. Mei smiled at their response, and then the expression on her face turned somewhat nasty. Give them hell, she practically snarled, her emerald eyes gleaming. Chukichi motioned, and the group of shinobi darted after him as they began to run across the water. Mei took a deep breath and turned back to Alpha Squad. We're on the clock, she told them determinedly. We need to reach the weapons factory by 13:15. Stay alert, pace yourselves and get ready for combat. Alpha Squad, depart. The journey towards the weapons factory was rather uneventful. They spent most of the time running over the water, or rather, the leaf nin did. The water nin used some kind of technique that looked like they were skating over the swells. Whatever it was, it seemed to much more efficient than water walking, as Team Sigma seemed to be far more tired than the resistance members as they rested halfway through the journey. Nonetheless, they made the 130-kilometer journey in good time, and soon they had arrived near the tip of the largest island in the land of water. They could tell they were arriving at the factory before it became visible. The water around them was soon littered with debris and rubbish, twisted plastic and half-melted barrels, and a terrible smell filled the air. Soon, on the coast ahead, a building began to loom. It honestly seemed half as large as the manufactorium, with dozens of tall, great chimney stacks rising into the air. Large, concrete walls had been built around it, and a huge pier and port jutted out from the coast towards the sea. Huge plumes of black smoke rose into the air, and dim layer of smog began to cloud everything they could see. Small towns had been built around the walls, possibly containing the homes of the workers. A large freighter seemed to be slowly pulling into port, and dozens of tiny figures ran to and fro along the piers. It was going to be a tough target to attack. Number 1, break the enemy's defense, Mei ordered them coolly. Her voice was brisk and toneless, and her usual smile was gone. Kiri, prepare to move on to the primary targets. Give the timers a count of 30 and then detonate. I'll assist number 1's team. Mei's route amongst the waves had kept them clear of loyalist shinobi, but the current course was going to lead them right into the factory. Clearly, this was going to be a full-on assault rather than any kind of stealth attack. Naruto could feel his heart surging, his blood racing in his veins. His chakra hummed underneath his skin as he reflexively folded the chakra in on itself again and again, making it dense and more potent. The secret chakra exercise of the third Hokage would give his ninjutsu more power, and allow him to utilize combination techniques that would normally require a full squad. In the distance, an alarm began to buzz, and the figures on the pier began to move away. They had been spotted. Allow me, Mei told Naruto as he began to make hand seals. He stopped as Mei's hands blurred and Naruto felt the shudder run down his back as an incredible amount of chakra built up within her. She reared her head back and spat out an enormous cloud of mist. It surged forward, much faster than the running shinobi, and shot over the docks. Whatever the mist touched, it corroded and ate away, and Naruto watched with some amazement as wood, metal and plastic simply melted and dissolved away. The mist continued to travel in towards the factory, and by the time Alpha Squad had arrived, the melted, twisted remains of the dock, the next 100 meters in front of them was in ruins. Fire release, fire dragon flame bullet technique. Naruto folded his chakra in on itself thrice, and condensed the resulting fire elemental chakra into a thin stream. It exploded from his mouth with enough force that made him take a step back, the sheer pressure of the supercharged, condensed flame creating a haze in the air all around him. The flame was a brilliant white and it hurt to look at as Naruto directed it at the enormous cargo ship that had docked on his right. His fire tore through the metal hull and moved downwards, splitting open the water with a hiss. With a trembling groan, the back quarter of the container ship began to fall away from the rest of the vessel. Metal snapped and twisted as the remaining bolts and rivets were unable to hold the huge weight up, and it was with a terrible crash and a huge splash that the back of the ship fell into the water. The rest of Alpha Squad stayed behind Naruto and Mei as the two chakra powerhouses continued to advance towards the facility. The alarms continued to blare, and in front of them the loyalist shinobi desperately tried to organize a defense behind their walls. A pair of solid metal gates began to close with a loud clank, but Mei merely tutted. Again, an enormous amount of chakra built up into his companion, and Naruto watched as red-hot molten rock dribbled from her mouth, her pale skin seemingly unaffected by the searing heat that Naruto could feel. It solidified into multiple boulders of molten rock, and they were fired forward with tremendous force, as if shot by a catapult or trebuchet. The fiery boulders struck the walls and exploded in huge plumes of smoke and fire. Concrete cracked, and several parts of the wall fell away. One boulder struck the closing gates, and a huge pillar of fire exploded from where it had fallen. When the fire died down, all that was left of the gate was a twisted, blackened heap of debris. Lightning release. Static pulse shot. Naruto threw out his hands and bolts of purple and blue crackling electricity blasted forward. A second later, the air was filled with the sound of rumbling thunder. The searing bolts of lightning went left and right, rising up and striking the crated holes that Mei's technique had left in the walls. Concrete rumbled, and huge pieces the size of carts fell to the ground, making it shudder. Lightning release. Electromagnetic murder. Naruto jumped forward and slammed his hands in the ground. Chakra surged through him and his tenketsu burned. Underneath the section of the wall in front of him, the ground cracked and shuddered. A furious discharge of surging bolts of lightning tore apart the earth and soil right underneath the concrete base of the wall, and the entire thing simply collapsed in front of them. It did so to reveal an enormous wave of water rising up towards them. Naruto caught a glimpse of several shinobi at the top of the factory with their hands twisted in various seals, before the tsunami rose up and blocked them from view. Both Mei and Naruto moved at the same time, falling into sync with each other. Earth release. Earth-style wall. The ground underneath them shuddered as Naruto manipulated the technique, and as Alpha Squad ran through the remains of the gates, a ramp made of rock and stone rose up from the ground. At the same time, Mei produced an enormous globe of water and surrounded them with a dense, curved torrent. The tsunami crashed upon them, but Mei's defensive technique shielded them from the worst of it as sprays of water splashed against them. Then, they rose above it, beyond the crashing waves of water that ran out to sea, taking with it the shattered remains of the docks with it. As soon as Naruto had a clear view of the enemy again, he palmed two kunai and hurled up as far as he could. Kunai shadow clone technique. At the top of their arc, as gravity once again began to pull them down, the two kunai became 200. They fell in a great wave of metal, slamming into the top of the factory, shattering skylights and lodging themselves in sheets of tin and plastic. Naruto made a single hand seal as they fell, his teeth bared behind his mask as the rush of combat fueled his body. Detonate. He roared. The explosive tag wrapped around the handle of every kunai, cloned or not, glowed white for a brief moment. Then, the air shook and the glass of the windows in front of them shattered as a series of explosions blended together to become a huge concussive wave of force. The upper level and roof of the factory simply caved in, disappearing under the balls of fire and force. At the same time, Naruto's earth technique, the rocky pillar that they were running onto them, slammed into the factory wall in front of them. Metal groaned and shrieked as it was torn apart, the earth technique lodging itself securely in the frame of the factory. Mei reared her head back and a stream red-hot magma shot forward. It splattered against the wall in front of them, which simply melted underneath the heat and pressure of her technique, leaving a hole big enough for the squad to run through. Naruto caught a brief glimpse of assembly lines before loyalist shinobi began their counterattack, but he managed to briefly check his watch. 1319. The Eastern Sea. The freighter, having left Taiji in the morning, continued its slow and steady journey towards the Bloody Cove, the land of water's only outpost on the main continent of the elemental countries. Each freighter was guarded by over 20 of Yagura's shinobi at all times, securing the cargo and preventing any attacks. Unfortunately for the loyalists, one of those shinobi was a resistance sleeper, and her guard post covered the eastern approach to the vessel. Sasuke ran at the back of Bravo Squadron, feeling the burn of running on water for over an hour. It was an exhaustively intense exercise, and if it hadn't been for the monstrous training regimen that he had been a part of since joining Team Sigma, he wouldn't have been able to make the journey. Nonetheless, he was able to follow Bravo Squadron as they closed in on the freighter with at least 60% of his chakra reserves ready for combat. His heart was beating, his Sharingan swirling behind his mask, and he knew that a smile had twisted across his face. With the adrenaline surging in his veins, and his chakra primed within his tenketsu, he was ready for anything. This was what he wanted, this was what he had always wanted. Missions that would test him, force him to enter situations that would develop and hone his skills. In the last 6 months under Naruto's command, he had grown so far that sometimes he could scarcely believe it. Soon it would be enough. At the front of the squad, Cage's hands moved. 21 chakra signatures ahead, prepare for disabling technique, all enemies are to be neutralized, however enemy with red headband is friendly, do not engage. Their leader, the stoic, quiet Chukichi, was running through a series of hand seals. When he finished, a surge of chakra blasted through the air around them. It sent a shudder down Sasuke's back and his Sharingan spun, trying to determine the effect of the unseen technique. It didn't take long. A chill began to fill the air, and it grew colder and colder. The water underneath his feet began to harden and ice over, and a frosty haze took to the air. The effects were more pronounced near the Atakebune. The water around it had become a sludge, ice and frost forming up to stop the ship, and Sasuke could hear the propellers underneath the water stop moving. The frost and ice crept over the ship, effectively halting it in its place, while the mist rose up towards the top of the vessel, blocking their entry of attack from view. It was an effective technique, but there was a tang to the air that had Sasuke surprised. He glanced sharply at Chukichi as the man began to bark out orders. Was it possible that that man was related to the missing Ninhaku? It had been over a year, but Sasuke's battle with the gentle boy remained fresh on his mind. It had been the day he had unlocked the potential of his eyes and the day he had been soundly defeated by those strange ice techniques. As Cage relayed the orders, Sasuke pushed the issue to the back of his mind. It really didn't matter at the moment. They were going to get that ship. Bravo Squad scaled the side of the ship and emerged on the deck. The enemy was waiting for them, and Sasuke was barely over the rungs and onto solid ground when he was attacked. Water style. Water bullet technique. Somebody shouted. A lanky shinobi, with dark eyes and a face twisted up in anger, reared his head back. It had been proven time and time again that verbalizing your techniques improved the efficiency and power of them, something to do with concentration and added mental focus. Nonetheless, Sasuke still didn't quite understand why some people did it. Yes, your techniques were more powerful and easier to produce, but for a competent enemy, all you were doing was telegraphing exactly what it is that you planned. A pair of kunai flashed as Sasuke slammed them down in metal beneath his feet. The razor-sharp edges lodged themselves in the deck, and Sasuke, crouched and waiting, placed a palm up towards the enemy. Black lines grew on his palm as he implemented the barrier technique. Barrier technique, polished mirror. As the Kirinin shot out a series of bullets of water from his mouth, Sasuke concentrated and formed a gleaming, transparent silver disc in front of his body. The water bullets struck them and the seal tags on the kunai flashed. An odd noise filled the air, like a rubber spring being wound back and released, and the water bullets bounced off the technique and back at the Kirinin. Two struck him in the chest and he gasped, but then one rocketed towards his head and snapped his neck back, and he fell back in a spray of limbs. Sasuke stood, palming his kunai, his Sharingan swirling. Combat had erupted all over the top deck of the ship, mostly obscured by the icy mist that had overtaken them. Nearby, Cage dueled furiously with a burly Kirinin wielding a giant sword, his dull black machete clashing with the enemy's blade in a shower of sparks. Toa held back, a gleaming red crossbow in his hand, and he sprayed a series of crimson bolts towards the other end of the vessel, shooting at something unseen. There was a blur of movement within the mist and somebody came charging at Sasuke. The young Uchiha's eyes spun, spotting every single detail of the approaching attack. A woman, with short cropped hair and a determined expression. Her muscles were poised and tense, her arm rising up, and the little quivers and the distribution of her body weight indicated she was going in for an overhead blow. Sweat beaded from her brow, her eyes were narrowed, one of her front teeth was fake, the other needed work, there was a loose thread on her flak jacket, one of her pockets had only been partially closed. He perceived it all in a fraction of a second. Sasuke inclined his head just a fraction and the blow going exactly where he had predicted it would missed his head, ruffling his hair. He countered with his own punch, but the woman's muscles tensed and she blocked it with her upper leg. Sasuke flipped back, avoiding the kick that came with the other leg, and she darted forward, engaging him in hand-to-hand combat. She was clearly a close-range fighter, and not a bad one at that. She was no Hyuga, but her movements were crisp and efficient. She used her long legs to her advantage, attacking him at a range that he couldn't easily counter. But, her expertise and skill was useless under the power of his eyes. Sasuke saw every move as if it were his own. Every tense of the muscle, every unconscious placing of the foot, every attack she began to move in, for he could see it all happening, and it was easy to dodge and avoid. They fought for a minute, Sasuke avoiding every single attack. It was somewhat annoying, as the woman's superior range made it much harder for the Uchiha to successfully counter. His mind whirled as he avoided a kick to the chin and spin around an elbow jab. Then, he darted forward and went in for a punch. The woman's face twitched as blocked his arm only centimeters from her face with a single hand on the wrist. Sasuke's eyes saw her other hand go for the kunai strapped to her back. He saw the momentum building up in the hand that gripped his arm, preparing to twist it sideways and break it. He could almost envision the move she would twist his arm, breaking it, forcing him to the left, while her other hand would grip the kunai and bring it down on his neck. A perfect counter. Except Sasuke had planned for it, known that she would block his strike right at that every place, and he pulled his index finger down. The wire on it snapped and the mechanism strapped to his arm clicked. A kunai shot smoothly down his sleeve, towards the hand that was only centimeters away from the woman's face just as she had begun to twist his arm. Her eyes widened, and she tried to lean away, but Sasuke grabbed the hilt of the kunai as it fell into his palm and drove it forward. It cut through skin and flesh, ripping into her right eye, and she let out a shriek as she stumbled backwards, clutching at it. Sasuke snapped a kick upwards, striking her in the throat, and her kunai fell to the deck as her other hand came to grasp at her neck. The Uchiha flipped through a series of hand seals and reared his head back. Fire release. Great fireball technique. The resulting wave of flames enveloped the woman in flames, and she shrieked and writhed as the force of the technique pushed her off the side of the ship. With a torn eye, a crushed throat and severe burns, Sasuke was certain that she would not be a problem ever again. He forced down the thrill and excitement of a successful victory as the mist began to lift over the ship. The enemy had been defeated. The Atakebune was theirs. The battle of the weapon factory was underway. The enemy garrison, several dozen shinobi, had fallen back under the devastatingly powerful barrage of ninjutsu from Naruto and Mei, and Alpha Squad had breached the facility and split up. The sound of fighting rose all around Naruto as he stood at the hole in the wall he had created, keeping a careful eye on everything around him as he defended their retreat. Alpha Squad had pressed in on all sides, the other members of the squad, pushing forward to plant the explosives. Mei had disappeared on the other side of the factory, and brilliant flashes of red lit up the entire facility as she engaged an unknown enemy. There was a rustle of cloth and Naruto's head shot up. His eyes widened as he picked up a rapidly falling blur heading straight for him, and he quickly jumped backwards. An instant later, the blur slammed into the rocky path he had created and a large, concussive boom filled the air. The stone shattered into a million pieces, completely pulverized by the power of the blow. As Naruto landed several meters away, the attacker blurred towards him, and the young Jinchuriki could briefly make out his features. It was a man. Tall, burly and a face full of rage, he was swinging a giant axe towards him. A leather cord wrapped around the end of the handle, winding past the man's robed body, while his headband gleamed under the light of the sun. Naruto palmed two kunai and moved to block the second, powerful strike. As he did so, the man spun, revealing his other hand behind his back and the hammer that it gripped, and Naruto's eyes widened. Axe, hammer, cord, helmet splitter. He had been given a general brief on all of the weapons of the seven swordsmen of the mist, even though Konoha wasn't exactly sure who the members were these days. He knew exactly how each one of them functioned and how they were used. He knew exactly how he was about to die. The helmet splitter swung at his defense, and the two kunai managed to halt the axe in its tracks, Naruto's arms locked together. The hammer blow that came next would have killed him had he not realized the identity of the weapon a second before, and just as it came to slam at the end of the axe and drive it past Naruto's defense, he jumped up off of the rocky ground. The hammer blow slammed the axe into him with deadly force, but with his feet in the air, the blow only went so far. One of his kunai shattered under the force, while the other twisted. His arm bent backwards and something snapped. Nonetheless, Naruto survived, although the force of the blow sent him rocketing away, and he fell towards the factory floor. He managed to make a single-hand seal, but then the swordsman was upon him, diving down to meet him. The axe lodged itself in his chest and Naruto made a gurgling noise. An instant later, he slammed into the ground, and the hammer came down to crush his head. The resulting blow cratered the concrete floor, sending shudders running through it. When the swordsman lifted his weapons, however, all that remained of the undercover shinobi was a series of wooden splinters, the result of a successful replacement technique. Naruto, holding one arm awkwardly and shoving the pain away, reared his head back. Fire release. Soaring flame bullets. Fire release. Great fireball technique. His chakra surged. Flame elemental chakra folded in on itself as Naruto molded it into the tenketsu in his throat, merging the two techniques into a single, deadly variant. He spat out a giant globe of fire 3 times the size of him, and then another, and then another. 3 giant fireballs raced towards the ground, sizzling and crackling. An instant later, dozens, hundreds, even of smaller streaks of flame fell from the falling orbs of flame. They bombarded the ground in a never-ending series of waves, and the swordsman disappeared under the barrage of fire. A few seconds later, the 3 giant fireballs struck the ground in 3 different places, and a furious storm of fire rose up, engulfing the entire area of the vast factory. Machinery sparked and exploded. Wooden crates burst into flame. Concrete grew red hot. The air around him howled as the huge fire sucked it all in towards itself. From it came a streak of movement as the swordsman, moving at speeds that rivaled Naruto, darted out of it. He had not escaped unscathed, however, and his robes were blackened and burnt, his exposed skin red and blistering. He spat out a water technique, and the fire hissed as an enormous wave of water came crashing down upon it, extinguishing most of it. Mist rose up into the air, thick plumes of hot steam rising, blocking Naruto's view. Wind release. Great wind breakthrough. Naruto was not going to let one of the 7 swordsmen of the mist use a silent killing technique. He threw out his hands, ignoring the flaring pain in his forearm, and banished the mist away with a huge billowing gust of air. He did it just in time, as the swordsman had advanced rapidly towards him and jumped up onto the metal walkway he stood on. The hammer swung, but Naruto ducked and pivoted around it, producing a kunai in his right, uninjured arm and using the swordsman's momentum against him as he parried it aside. He let go of the kunai as he darted past the man, one hand rising up into a seal. Kunai shadow clone. Wind release. Wind breakthrough. The one kunai became 100, and the smaller wind release technique propelled him at the man's suddenly exposed back. The swordsman was quick, however, using his giant axe as a shield to block most of the kunai, and as Naruto spun around, he leaned back and threw his giant hammer. The leather cord extended as the huge hammer flew towards Naruto, who had to jump away as the hammer slammed down onto where he was standing. The metal walkway shattered underneath the power of the blow, bits of debris and twisted metal scrap falling on the blackened, smoldering factory floor. The hammer must have weighed a lot, Naruto deducted grimly as he landed on a lower metal walkway. They crisscrossed the roof of the assembly line, although many of them had been damaged or destroyed in the attack. The swordsman jumped down and Naruto darted away, avoiding a swing that would have taken his head. The blow was close enough that he could feel the wind whipping past him, and several strands of hair fell on his shoulders as he jumped up to a higher walkway. The blonde Anbu heard the rustle of robe and groan of metal as he was pursued, and he threw a kunai at the railway he was just about to land on. Then, he jumped away again, spinning in the air and making a hand seal. Detonate. The explosive tag detonated and the metal railing collapsed with the screech of twisting metal. The swordsman batted it aside with his hammer, but it had given Naruto enough time to find the high ground, and he bombarded the man with more fire. Streaks shot down by the dozens, whizzing through the air, striking the nearby railed paths and slamming into the blackened concrete below. The man blocked them with his hammer and axe, but temporarily halted his advance. Then, before Naruto could form a more powerful technique, the swordsman unclipped the cord from his hammer and hurled it upwards. Naruto jerked his head back as the hammer flew by inches from his face, disappearing into the ceiling. Something smashed above as the hammer burst through the roof and disappeared from view. The man used Naruto's distraction to advance, and a second later he was in front of Naruto, axe swinging. Naruto blocked with a kunai and for a few moments, they duelled. The man was strong, much physically stronger than Naruto. He was also fast on his feet. Naruto, however, was smaller and much more agile, and without the hammer to support the axe, he was able to parry and avoid most of the wide blows. Sparks flew as metal grinded on metal. Naruto ducked as the axe swung at his head. The swordsman jumped back as Naruto lunged for his knee. Naruto sidestepped a kick to the face and parried another blow from the axe. His kunai was chipping and dulling, and Naruto threw it at the swordsman's face. The man blocked it, but it gave Naruto enough time to produce another. Suddenly, another crashing noise filled the air above them as the roof was smashed. Naruto's eyes widened as the hammer returned back to the earth, gravity taking hold, and the swordsman grinned. He held out his hand and the hammer zoomed towards it. It took a second and a half. In that time, Naruto, realizing the danger he was in, jumped up off the railing and sped through some hand seals. Water release. Exploding water colliding wave. His mouth bulged with water and he spat it out in huge waves, the torrents pouring forward down on the metal walkway he had just been fighting on. The swordsman retrieved his hammer, but as he spun around the water was on him and he was washed away, over the railing and towards the ground. The head splitter fell from his hands as the swordsman twisted in the air, hands flashing, and suddenly a rippling wave of water rose up. It formed a long, serpent-like dragon and lunged at Naruto. The blonde Anbu threw himself away and the water dragon smashed into something behind him. He fell as well, looping wire around his good arm and throwing a kunai as he did, and his fall descended into a swing. He landed on a nearby walkway and released the wire, turning to face the enemy once more. His heart was racing, his blood pumping furiously through his veins. Despite his broken arm, Naruto could continue to fight. The swordsman, however, was panting. His burned, blistered skin was oozing blood, and his limbs were shaking as he supported his weight on one leg. His next charge was much slower than the rest, and Naruto saw an opportunity to end it. As the man came in for a blow with his axe, Naruto flipped through some hand seals. Wind release, wind cutter technique. He threw out his hands and a scythe of sharpened wind grew in his hands. A second later, the axe slammed into it and the wind hissed and sparked as the metal grinded upon it. Naruto held it, gritting his teeth, and the man, despite his pain, seemed confident as his hammer rose. In that split second, as the hammer came down, Naruto ducked and the propelled axe swept over his head. He lunged forward and thrust the wind scythe right into the swordsman's belly. He roared in pain, his axe flying back. Naruto slapped an explosive tag onto his leg and then kicked him in the groin, pushing off and avoiding the axe while simultaneously sending the man flying off the railing. Naruto landed on his feet, hands flashing, and finished the fight with one more technique. Earth release, rising stone spears. The ground beneath the falling swordsman erupted with gleaming, stone spears. At the same time, the primed explosive tag on the man's leg detonated with a small blast, disrupting the man's attempt at an escape technique. It was with a sickening squelch that he landed on the rising stone spears. The swordsman twitched once and then went still. A moment later, the head splitter fell on the ground with a thundering boom. Naruto took deep breaths as he surveyed his enemy. Satisfied that he was dead, he turned around, gingerly touching his arm. The fighting was still going on around them, but it seemed to be dying down. Lava spilled from the other side of the factory, melting everything it touched, and smoke rose into the air. Some minutes later, the members of Alpha Squad began to trickle back. The resistance shinobi were first. The spiky-haired, scowling teen was one of the first to arrive, and he glanced at Naruto's wound sharply. His palms glowed green and he began using his medical ninjutsu to heal the fractured arm. Mei appeared next, looking untouched. She glanced down at the swordsman's body and a dark, satisfied smile glimmered on her face. Well done, she congratulated Naruto. He was a dangerous man. He had killed several of my operatives before today. You did well. Naruto acknowledged her praise with a curt nod. His eyes were on Rat, Yuka and Komaki, who were approaching. Yuka held the back of her head as Komaki tended to it on the move, blood seeping between her fingers. Rat's robes were torn but he looked otherwise fine. As the last of the resistance members joined them, one being carried by his partner, Mei gestured to the entry. It's time to leave. As Alpha Squad departed the factory several minutes after their initial attack, a series of explosions tore through the air. The ground beneath their feet and the trees around them rustled, swaying to and fro as the force of the detonations shook them. The factory disappeared underneath a fog of dust, several sections of its walls collapsing in on itself. Huge plumes of smoke rose into the air, and the alarms continued to blare even as Alpha Squad slunk into the shadows of the forest surrounding the island. The first stage of the mission was complete. That will be it for this video. If you want more, comment down below, like, subscribe. And see you guys later.